Imagine waking up one day to find that everything you believed about yourself was wrong. Ruby, the spoiled heiress, is about to learn the hardest and most transformative lesson of her life. And the teacher? A young man named Paul, who doesn't have a penny in his pocket, but has something she never had: character. This is not just a story about rich and poor. It's about the moment when life rubs your privilege in your face and gives you a chance to change. Will Ruby seize this opportunity? Or will the comfort of the old habit speak louder? Have you ever thought about what really defines you? Not your bank balance, not your last name, but your choices when no one is looking. Ruby is about to find out, and you can learn from her every mistake and success. Get ready for a journey that will make you laugh, be indignant, and, who knows, rethink your own certainties. Because in the end, we all have a little bit of Ruby and Paul inside of us. The question is, which one do you feed more? Chapter 1. Conflict between generations. Ruby was the kind of girl who had everything, but felt like nothing was really hers. Her parents, powerful figures in the business world, wanted to mold her like a diamond in the rough, cut, polished, and set in an arranged engagement ring. Oh yes, because even her love had an owner. Paul, a name she didn't even know yet, was just another detail in the script of life they wrote for her. And look at the irony. The more they tried to control it, the more it rebelled, like a raging river that overflows when dammed. Have you ever felt this way? As if your choices were just illusions, and someone was always with their finger ready to press Ctrl+Z in your life? Ruby knew she needed to escape, but she didn't imagine that the price of freedom would come in the form of an accident, literally. The lesson here is clear. When you try to stifle your essence, the universe has a funny way of blowing everything up the back door. She could have followed her parents' playbook: fancy parties, plastic smiles, a hand-picked husband. But Ruby had a problem: a heart that beat too hard to settle for gilded cages. What example would you follow? That of blind obedience, or that of rebellion that can cost everything or teach everything? The reflection remains. You can understand her parents, of course. Who doesn't want to protect their children from the dangers of the world? The problem is when protection becomes prison and love becomes control. Ruby was about to discover that sometimes you have to lose your ground to learn to fly. And her floor was going to disappear in a way that no one, not even her, expected. What would you do if your biggest mistakes were actually your only chances of success? Ruby was one step away from figuring it out, but first, she needed to crash the car, and in the process, run over not only a young man named Paul, but the entire perfect life her parents built for her. Chapter 2. Accident that changes everything. The night was filled with laughter, champagne, and that false sense of invincibility that money gives. Ruby got in the car without a second thought. After all, the rules were for ordinary people, not someone like her. Until, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. The sound of the impact, the headlights cutting through the darkness, and then, Swamp, a boy she had never seen, now lying on the asphalt, with the fate of the two irretrievably linked by a second of irresponsibility. Some choices are like rocks thrown into a pond. The effects spread far beyond the starting point. Ruby didn't imagine that this accident would trigger an earthquake in her family's life. Scandal in the media, lawyers coming out of the sewers like cockroaches, and that heavy silence that only exists when power realizes it can't buy everything. Have you ever made a mistake that changed everything? That kind of mistake that forces you to face who you really are? Paul, the accident, the blood on the asphalt, none of that was part of the plan. But life has those. Just when you think you're in control, it throws you to the ground and whispers, "Learn." Ruby was about to discover that some lessons hurt more than others, and that the price of redemption doesn't come with a label. She could have fled. He had money, influence, all the shortcuts in the world. But something inside her, a remnant of humanity that luxuries couldn't corrupt, made her stay. Would you have the same courage? Or would you, like most, take the easy way out and live the rest of your life wondering, what if? The accident was just the beginning. Because now, Ruby was no longer fighting against her parents or the system. She was fighting herself, and Paul, unknowingly, was the mirror she never wanted to have. Chapter 3. Legal and personal consequences. Money can buy silence, but it cannot erase guilt. As the family's lawyers worked frantically to bury the case, Ruby was beginning to understand the real weight of what she had done. Paul wasn't just a name on paper. He was a human being with dreams, fears, a family that cried in public hospitals while hers discussed strategies in air-conditioned rooms. Have you ever wondered what is worth more, a stack of bills or the peace of knowing that you did the right thing? Ruby was having this crisis in real time. And worse, she could no longer hide behind her last name or her parents' bank accounts. The truth is, money only amplifies who you already are, and she didn't like what she saw. Paul's family turned down the first offer of compensation, and then the second, and the third. For them, it wasn't about value, it was about fairness, something Ruby had never considered before. How do you react when someone shows you that your world is built on rotten privileges? She could feel the ground shake. Her parents insisted, "It's just a problem to be solved." But Ruby was beginning to doubt. What if some things can't be fixed? What if the only way to move forward is to face the dirt head-on? Paul, in his hospital bed, became the symbol of everything she tried to ignore. The worst thing was not the possibility of going to jail. It was the certainty that, even free, she would never be the same again. And maybe, just maybe, that would be a good thing. Chapter 4. New Reality in a Humble Home. The judge handed down an unusual sentence. Ruby would spend 6 months living with Paul's family, helping with his care and learning what it meant to live without assistance, credit cards, or excuses. On the first day, she looked at the small house, the floor that needed to be swept, the sink full of dishes, and felt a chill down her spine. How did anyone live like that? The answer came quickly, with work. A lot of work. Paul's mother woke up at 5 a.m. to clean offices before formal employment. The younger brother sold candy at the traffic light. And Ruby? She didn't even know how to turn on a washing machine. Have you ever found yourself completely lost in a simple situation? The humiliation of not being able to do the basics is a punch to the ego. Paul, still recovering, watched everything with a mixture of anger and curiosity. He didn't want her there, but he couldn't deny it either. Ruby was trying. Making a big mistake, but trying. How many times in your life have you given up on something because it wasn't good at first? She was learning by force that dignity does not come from getting it right, but from persisting. Gradually, the luxuries she considered essential, designer clothes, expensive dinners, began to seem ridiculous. How to explain to someone who is hungry that you spent 1,000 reis on a bag? Ruby couldn't, and that discomfort was just what she needed. In the end, Paul's humble home was no punishment. It was a mirror, and Ruby was finally ready to face the reflection. Chapter 5. Clash of Worlds. Ruby and Paul were like two planets orbiting different suns. She complained about slow Wi-Fi. He celebrated when he had rice and beans for the whole month. She changed her cell phone as if changing clothes. He repaired the same device for 3 years. The shock was inevitable and painful. But here's the magic. When two worlds collide, something new is born. Ruby began to realize that her perfect life was made up of illusions, while Paul's simplicity had a kind of richness she never knew. Loyalty, for example, or gratitude for breakfast. Have you ever stopped to think about how many things you have, and how many of them really matter? Paul, on the other hand, faced his own dilemma. Accepting Ruby's help meant admitting that he needed her, and for someone proud like him, it hurt more than the injuries. Which is harder for you? Asking for help or admitting you're wrong? Both were learning that vulnerability is not weakness, it is humanity. The roles began to reverse. Ruby, who had never cooked, burned dinner, and they all laughed together. Paul, who hated the rich, saw Ruby cry because she didn't know how to afford expensive medicine for him. The stereotypes were cracking, and in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected was born. They still fought, of course. She called him stubborn, he called her spoiled. But between the lines, there was a new respect. And maybe, just maybe, something more. Something neither of them was ready to name. Chapter 6. Emotional Growth. Ruby woke up one day with a strange feeling, responsibility. Not the one imposed by the parents, but one that came from within. She wanted, for the first time, to do something right. Not to show up, not to serve time, but because it was simply the right thing. And that, my friend, is the first sign of maturity. Paul also changed. The hatred he felt for Ruby gradually turned inquisitiveness. How could someone who had everything be so empty? And how did this same person now care so much? Have you ever noticed that opposites, when they stop fighting, often complete each other? They were living proof of that. Ruby learned to do laundry, to cook rice without burning, to count change. Paul learned that accepting help didn't make him smaller, and that even the privileged have pain. What was your last hard lesson? The one that made you grow even against your will? For both, every day was a new challenge. The funniest thing? Ruby began to enjoy the simple life. There was a beauty in things she had never noticed. The smell of fresh coffee, the silence of the early morning, the satisfaction of fixing something with her bare hands. Paul saw this and wondered, is it really changing, or is it just another phase? The answer was about to arrive, along with a decision that would test everything they had learned. Because growth is not linear, and the real test comes when the easy options knock on the door again. Chapter 7. Family Under Pressure. While Ruby lived her redemption, her parents were at war. Journalists sniffing the case, colleagues from high society whispering at dinners, investors worried about instability. To them, Ruby wasn't a daughter. She was an asset that was depreciating, and problematic assets need to be contained. Ruby's mother showed up at Paul's humble home with a proposal, money for his family, in exchange for silence and the immediate return of her daughter. "She doesn't belong here," he said, with a look that chilled even the coffee. But here's the problem. Ruby was no longer sure where she belonged. Have you ever felt torn between what's easy and what's right? Paul heard everything, and for the first time, he saw Ruby not as the rich girl, but as someone as trapped as he was. Money doesn't buy freedom. Sometimes, it's the cell itself. The question was, would Ruby realize this before she was swallowed back into the system? Parents pressured, threatened, negotiated. But something inside Ruby resisted. She had begun to like the person she was becoming, someone Paul respected, whom his family had taken in, who could sleep without medicine for the first time in years. Was it worth throwing it all away? The answer would come on a rainy night, when Paul finally asked, "What do you want, Ruby? Really?" And she realized she didn't know. Or maybe he knew, but was afraid to admit it. Chapter 8. And open for reconciliation. The last day has arrived. Ruby had a choice: return to her parents' golden arms, or stay in the real world that challenged her every day. Paul watched quietly, knowing that any word could influence her, and that wouldn't be fair. Some decisions need to be made alone. She looked both ways. Of one, security, luxury, a pre-molded future. On the other, uncertainty, but also authenticity. And Paul, always Paul. Have you ever been in a moment where a choice defines who you will be? Ruby was there, and the clock was ticking. The parents were waiting in the armored car. Paul's family watched from the door, non-judgmental, only hope. In the middle, Ruby, with a backpack on her back and a divided heart. What weighs more? What do you owe, or what do you want? She took a deep breath. He took a step, and then another. The camera, or your imagination, froze at that moment, leaving the answer in the air. Because sometimes, the ending doesn't matter. What changes us is the journey. What about you? What would I do in her place? Return to the easy life, or embrace the unknown that makes you grow? Ruby and Paul show us that there are no simple answers, only consequences. What about you? Are you living on autopilot or facing your own truths? Leave it in the comments. Have you ever had a moment that forced you to change? Paul, who appeared in your life to shake you up? Or is it, just like Ruby in the beginning, that you're still trapped in a cage you don't even know exists? If this story made you reflect, imagine what else you can discover here. Sign up, activate the bell, and let's go together on this journey of self-knowledge that, I guarantee, no expensive course or coaching advice can offer you. Because the best lessons, as Ruby discovered, often come from the most unexpected places.